Okay, well, this is my last talk for the semester. Um, so um, the final clip of Life with Beth, and so I guess we'll start the story in the spring semester of my undergrad year, my senior undergrad year. I basically had life all planned out for the following fall to go to graduate school. Was accepted, had everything lined up, and one spring evening my mother had her cousin over and her husband for dinner one evening, and their daughter had also gone to graduate school, got her PhD in chemistry. And in the course of conversation, of course, about dessert time, conversation naturally turned to my academic plans. And I, stated what I was planning to do. And the husband, a very nice, respectable man, just seemingly offhandedly commented, "Well, no Mennonite guy wants to marry a girl with a PhD." And as a only child and my parents' only hope of grandchildren, I was a little bit concerned that this would change their blessing on my decision. But thankfully it did not, and it didn't change my determination one iota for going to grad school. So I studied grad school, as I mentioned before, that following fall in Baltimore. And whether any of you have directly heard comments like this, or whether you think you're on the safe side of the gender divide, you actually, it's a fairly common concept in conservative Christian circles. Thankfully, thankfully, regardless of where you fall in the gender divide, you can actually affect feelings either direction. And so I went to graduate school, and I totally dived into studies. I didn't have time to worry about getting married or anything. I was having too much fun and working too hard, some mix of the above. And I mean, if any of you females want concepts later for how to ward off nice but non-Christian guys, you can talk to me later. Hiding in the back of the med school from med students while trying to look up "be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers" may result in being found. Just a side note, gender-specific bathrooms are probably a better location for such activities, but hopefully all of you will have gender-specific bathrooms by the time you get to graduate school. So that was, I really enjoyed graduate school, and as I mentioned my last talk, I stayed in Baltimore for my postdoc. For those of you who aren't familiar with scientific terminology, if you get a PhD, a postdoc is sort of like the equivalent to medical residency. So after someone graduates from med school, they do have an MD, but they're supposed to work under someone else's supervision for a couple years till they're actually released onto the trusting public. And basically the same with PhDs. If you want to go into research, they make you work under someone else. So I stayed in Baltimore for my postdoc, and about 2 years into my postdoc, I remember it was one Friday evening, it was actually the week after Valentine's Day. One of the girls at our international fellowship, she was a young Christian Chinese, sort of notorious for being a little guy crazy. cornered me, literally shut the door behind me and cornered me in the lunchroom and said, Beth, you're intelligent, relatively beautiful. Why aren't you married? Or why don't you have a boyfriend? And I decided to take the opportunity to educate her on the benefits of singlehood. And teach her that, some of Paul's teachings in Corinthians about the all you can do for God single. And I was, at that point, had a great relationship with my church, with the Christian network, the Christians at Hopkins there. And I was meeting up with people several times a week for outreach activities, and life was just good. I believed every word I told her. Little did I know that, unbeknownst to me, maybe God answers prayers before you pray them, or answers your friends' prayers that they pray without you asking them to. But the very next morning, after I gave her the lowdown on the wonders of single life, I was informed by my father that some guy named David Bennett was interested in having a date with me. And my knee-jerk reaction, as I was actually pretty ticked at David, who was this guy that we had known each other a little bit, but I didn't think he knew me very well, who had the audacity to think he could make my life better. I had a good life. Who did he think he was? So I said, well, let's take this guy up on the offer for a free lunch. And, innocent until proven guilty. We'll see what he has to say. So by way of background, David and I had first met as adults. My first year of graduate school. His brother-in-law was in medical residency at Hopkins in Baltimore, was the nephew of my dad's colleague. So I had met up with him and his wife, and they had me over to their house for Christmas Eve when her family and all the cousins and who name it was there. And I was pretty sure this was a setup, and I tried to give David all the nonverbal clues possible that I was not interested. And giving nonverbal clues to an engineer may be like sowing seed on stony ground. Apparently none of them made their way to him. And so we saw each other once every year for 6 years. His sisters were super party throwers, so even if they were trying to set me up, boycotting their party was really not in my best interest. As time went on, yes, I did accept that first date, and then asked for 6 months to pray about things. David wasn't excited about having to wait 6 months, but he said, I guess that's a month for every year I considered you, and so that's fairly generous on your part. So he graciously accepted the 6-month wait. And in that 6 months, finally, after the semester was over, I actually had time to think and pray a little bit more. And sort of came to the conclusion through the advice of other people, and praying about it. And in the back of my mind, also, when I had gone to SMBI, I very slightly conceitedly probably took personal evangelism class over Christian family living. But in personal evangelism, I distinctly remembered we had Elijah Yoder and him talking about fasting and praying, and very specifically made the comment, if a guy asks you who you're not interested in, you should at least fast and pray about it before you turn him down if he's a decent Christian guy. So I fasted and prayed about it and decided that I should maybe give this guy a go, but hopefully I'll find some way to criticize his character, and or maybe God's purpose is for me to set him up with one of my other friends who's, a little bit more on his intellectual level. I consider myself slightly below his intellectual level. So it's true. But God sort of had other plans, and as time went, I can send it to the second date, at which point I thought I found 3 character flaws in him. He didn't thank me for the dinner I made for him. He didn't ask me how my day was, and he didn't offer me dessert when he took me out. So I thought those were 3 major character flaws that I was grounded for, very well grounded in crossing him off the list. But before I was able to get rid of him, he changed my mind on a 3rd date and was very willing to sacrifice for my friends. And so I decided maybe I shouldn't try to pass him along, and maybe I would consider keeping him, which I did. And as you can tell by my last name, I did eventually consent to marry him. And some of it was based upon, as we dated, I saw how broken he was before God. And I'll just, in closing, read an excerpt. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the author, Dr. Gene Edwards, and he wrote a book I'd highly recommend called The Tale of Three Kings. And it's about King David comparing his relationship to Saul and Absalom, and how David dealt with the challenges faced by both of those men. And in this book, in referring to David, he says, God has a university. It's a small school. Few enroll, even fewer graduate, very few indeed. God has this school because he does not have broken men and women. Instead, he has several other types of people. He has people who claim to have God's authority and don't, people who claim to be broken and aren't, and people who do have God's authority but who are mad and unbroken. And he has, regretfully, a great mixture of everything in between. All of these he has in abundance, but broken men and women hardly at all. And as we go forward in life, it's a constant struggle, or a constant battle to remain broken before God. And regardless of what life throws you, and how God answers your prayers or prayers that your friends prayed for you, that is where we want to be, in God's hands. So thank you. That's all I have.